Bienvenue tous, welcome to Reporters here on France 24. I'm Mark Owen. In this edition, the mysteries of why those who express views different to those of the government disappear in China. We spend a lot of time as journalists reporting on the business, environment and cultural reach of China. This programme, though, will expose the horror of being a person who dares to disagree with Beijing. You'll see it's of a cruelty many of us would find impossible to imagine, physically, psychologically, financially too. Defenders of human rights, politically speaking, have been there, including the French President Emmanuel Macron. Deals are done. Dissidents, though, and everyone else whose views and conduct may not be in step with the government, suffer an unknown fate when it comes to trade versus principles. Trade always wins. So what about the families of those who are still missing? This report's by Angélique Forget and Antoine Védier.
Hong Kong, secoué par le récit d'un libraire enlevé par les autorités chinoises.
Fue detenido e interrogado durante meses en China por haber vendido obras críticas con Pekín.
Hong Kong bookseller to return home after going missing for 8 months. Earlier this week, Lam Wing-Ki became the fourth of 5 Causeway Bay booksellers to resurface in Hong Kong.
His story spread around the world. In October 2016, Lam Wing-Ki, a bookseller in Hong Kong, disappeared in the south of China. For 8 months, his relatives had no news of him. Upon his release, he gave a press conference where he said he was kidnapped and detained by Chinese authorities.
I was really scared. I was lost. I felt lonely, with no one to help me. I didn't know what they'd do to me. What they did was not legal. I wondered if they would ever put me on trial.
2 years after his disappearance, Lam Wing-Ki still can't turn the page. The bookstore in which he worked is closed by order of the authorities.
Here's my bookstore. When I come into the neighborhood, I come here to take a look. Someone recently put a note. There it says, "Hold on." Some customers were really grateful for the work that was done in this bookstore.
Lam Wing-Ki isn't the only one who went missing. Wang Yu, a human rights lawyer, went missing for 18 months. Peter Dahlin, the Swedish head of an NGO, wasn't seen for 23 days. Li Wenzu is still looking for her husband. Like them, hundreds of others have been kidnapped and hidden away from the outside world. What happens when these people vanish? Where are they detained? Why are the targets so often defenders of human rights? We tracked down some of China's disappeared. Wang Yu is one of China's most famous human rights lawyers and was among the first to disappear. She agrees to meet us in secret, despite threats to her and her family. On July 9th, 2015, in the middle of the night, she was arrested at home by the state security services.
There were a lot of them, several dozen. They threw me on the bed, put my hands behind my back. There were a lot of them against me. They handcuffed me and held me tight. Then they put a bag over my head, and they took me out of my home.
Wang Yu was accused of subverting state power. For more than a year, she was detained and tortured.
They deprived me of food and water, sleep too. They prevented me from sleeping for 5 days and 5 nights. I felt they wanted to torture me until I died. I still wonder how I made it to the end. In fact, I felt as though I died there.
The sudden disappearance of Wang Yu marked the beginning of a wave of arrests in China. In total, nearly 300 lawyers and human rights defenders disappeared from one day to the next. Some have since been sentenced to long jail terms. The purge, which started on the 9th of July 2015, has become known as the 709 incident. In Beijing, we meet one of the only lawyers to defend his colleagues who've been imprisoned or threatened by the Chinese authorities. In his office, he has dozens of files.
There are many relatives of the members of the 709 incident who have filed their case with us so that I can represent them. I can show you their letters. There are many. For example, here, there's a letter from Li Yufeng. She's accused of disturbing public order. She was arrested. This is a letter from Jiang Tianyong. He was afraid of being arrested.
Liang Yaojin knows that for taking these cases, he could also disappear.
I'm scared too. Of course I'm scared. I think that many human rights lawyers live in fear.
Since 2012, a Chinese law allows authorities to remove suspects and hold them in secret. This detention can last 6 months. A legal framework for what Liang Yaojin prefers to call black jails.
In China, the black jails, we call them residential surveillance at a designated place. It can be anywhere. In fact, it's as if these people have disappeared. It's not clear where these places are. Even the people who come out can't say where they were. Inside, these people are placed in a room where guards monitor them 24/7, and everything they do is recorded. Their movements are limited, they're beaten, tortured. They must answer questions. They're tortured physically and psychologically. These places aren't called black jails, but in fact, they are black jails.
These disappearances are orchestrated by the Chinese government. Since taking office, Xi Jinping has been cracking down on civil society and suppressing all dissenting voices.
We must firmly fight the words and actions that undermine and disrupt the authority of the party.
A warning for anyone who wants more freedom. For human rights groups, this repression is reminiscent of dark times in Chinese history.
You'll have the opportunity to give another. Since reform and opening in 1978, when China took a historic change of course to try to reintegrate with the world and with global institutions, it's been one of the worst crackdowns arguably since then, or since the Tiananmen Square crackdown in 1989.
In China, one lawyer has become the symbol of Beijing's authoritarian tendencies. Wang Yu is the last of the hundreds of missing people never to have resurfaced.
This photo was taken in May 2015. 2 months later, he was arrested. This is one of the last beautiful moments we had together.
Since his disappearance 2.5 years ago, his wife and their 5-year-old son haven't heard from him.
I miss my dad. Here, I put this picture. There it says, "Dad, come back quickly. Dad, come back quickly."
Since his arrest, Wang Yu has been held in secret. Nobody knows where he is.
The lawyers I hired to defend him don't have the right to visit him. And I don't have the right to communicate with him. We don't have any news. I don't know how he's doing. In fact, I don't even know if he's still alive, but I don't let myself think about that because it's too painful to imagine. But I don't know anything. I have no news. My husband was such a beautiful person, an honest man. Because of the Chinese government, it's been 890 days, 2.5 years now, that I have no news.
The Chinese authorities didn't respond to our requests for interviews regarding Wan Chuanjiang's fate. In China, defending freedoms can lead to exile. A neighboring country has become a refuge for those fleeing repression. We travel to Thailand, where hundreds of Chinese nationals are hiding out. It's also home now to a Swedish activist who sought refuge.
You too.
Peter Dahlin used to head up an NGO in Beijing helping human rights defenders. For this, the Chinese government accused him of subversion and arrested him in January 2016. He's told the story of his disappearance and detention in a book written with other victims.
So you got 11 people, lawyers, some media workers, NGO workers.
All were placed in residential surveillance at a designated place, the black jails of Chinese power. Peter Dahlin was deprived of sleep for several days.
It's because in here, you're alone. There is nothing. There is no prosecutor that will come to check on you. There is no right to access a lawyer. Your family will not be notified where you are, and they can keep you for 6 months without any judicial process. You have no right to any appeal.
Peter Dahlin remained locked up for 23 days. To get out, he was forced to confess his crimes on Chinese public television.
I violated Chinese law through my activities here. I have caused harm to the Chinese government. I have hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. I apologize sincerely for this, and I'm very sorry that this ever happened. Everything that's being said was written down before. The questions and the answers were written down, studied, adjusted, and it was basically me and this journalist from CCTV. We would simply read our lines. She had the paper, I had the paper. She would read the question, I would read the answer.
In recent years, China has increased the use of forced confessions. They are used as evidence during trials and undermine the power of human rights defenders.
When you look at someone that you've respected and you know that they're a fighter for human rights, and then you see them reading a statement, and saying something that you would never believe that they would say before, I mean, that strikes fear into people because they only can imagine what the government did in order to get that person to say those types of things.
To avoid such a scenario, Yaojin decided to leave Beijing 2 years ago. We catch up with him in the streets of Bangkok. In China, he taught economics at university and was active in a pro-democracy movement.
The Chinese Communist Party wants to arrest people like me, who have different political opinions. To avoid prison and to avoid being persecuted, I have no other choice. I can only run away and live here. Even here in Bangkok, there are always risks. To avoid putting myself in danger, I often look behind me to make sure I'm not being followed.
Even outside of China, Yaojin doesn't feel safe. Beijing doesn't let borders limit its pursuit of dissidents. Today, he's forced to hide, far from his family, in the premises of a medical office.
Here's where I live. This is where I sleep, I cook, everything happens here. It's also here that I run my machines. Before I owned my apartment in China, a 2-bedroom apartment, with a living room too. I lived here with my wife and child.
In Thailand, Yan Bo-jun has been granted refugee status by the United Nations.
To me, it's an incredible situation, because in China, I would never have imagined that one day I would be exiled in Thailand, that I would become a refugee. All that I did was to improve my country and to serve the people. I didn't think it would lead to me being in exile, that I would have to flee and live abroad. I didn't think I would be like a ghost for my country. Even in my worst nightmares, I didn't think I would get here.
His family, his friends, his country. For Yan Bo-jun, the Chinese government has taken them all. And Thailand is only an initial step. He hopes to rebuild his life in the United States, escaping again rather than disappearing.
Our report was by Angélique Fourget and Antoine Vellier. See it again, of course, via our website, france24.com. This is Reporters on France 24. Stay with us.